I can't help but feel that Gears of War has lost its way over the past several entries. Now, there are a couple of reasons why I think this is the case, like some dumbass gameplay choices, but I think the biggest reason is due to some new characters being complete ass trash. So I'm not going to pretend that this original cast of characters were amazing or anything, but they were much more enjoyable and a better fit for the franchise. Let's start off and talk about Kate. Kate fucking sucks. I honestly just don't get what the devs were thinking when they decided to make her the main protagonist in Gears 5. She wasn't interesting in Gears 4, and being center stage in the sequel just makes that even more apparent. The devs seem insistent on thrusting her to the forefront of the story. She's also heavily touted in Microsoft's advertising, even having the audacity to put her next to the Master Chief.
How dare you stand where he stood?
One of Kate's biggest problems is how passive of a role she takes in the story. In Gears 4, she kind of just tags along with the other characters. Even though finding her mom is a huge part of the plot, it's always Marcus or JD that is calling the shots, not her. And this stays consistent even in the next game, where she is the main character. It's always other characters who dictate where Kate is and what she does. Kate is an important character for the story only because the plot demands it, and not because she makes any decisions that actually propel the story forward, which makes for a shit character. I think the writers tried way too hard to make Kate some kind of gruff badass, but instead she comes across as cold and whiny. And this isn't helped by the fact that her voice actress and her facial animations are unconvincing. I feel like Kate just has this perpetual dumb look on her face in every scene, regardless of what's happening.
Dum 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 dum.
Let's take a look at an actual badass female character in this game, Lizzie Carmine.
Control, need backup. I smashed your things about this. Fuck it. Never mind, Control. I took care of it. DBs, we gotta secure this straight.
Boom! Just in this one scene, she instantly solidifies herself as a badass that I might actually want to get invested in. And then she dies in like the next scene. And that's all we really ask for in these games. Just some simple, charismatic 80s action hero types that spit out one-liners. Not boring, melodramatic characters. Give us more of this. And less of this.
Well, Captain, screw your order. This isn't about you, it's about me.
It's all about me!
The problem with characters like Kate is that she doesn't fit in the game world that she is in. This is a world where someone thought it was a good idea to take a chainsaw and an assault rifle and put them together so that you can fucking cut bad guys in half with it. Such over-the-top violence calls for equally over-the-top personalities with plenty of levity and comic relief, and Kate just doesn't fit into the game's aesthetic. Now let's take a second to talk about JD and Del. So I don't necessarily hate these guys like I do Kate, but I do think they're kind of bland compared to the old characters.
For Christ's sake, your black guy doesn't even go woo!
I think their biggest crime here is that these two are essentially identical as far as characterization goes. They're both generic, wisecracking rebel dudes that we've seen a million times. The game even seems to be aware of this since you get to pick which one gets killed off. Oh yeah, spoilers. Assuming that this decision carries over into Gears 6, it likely won't impact the story in any significant way, since these characters are so alike and interchangeable. Now, while I appreciate the attempt to provide some comic relief with these characters, they aren't particularly funny either, and JD specifically sounds like he's doing a bad Nathan Drake impression.
Look, that's state-of-the-art car technology. I don't think... Oh, okay.
The end result is that these two come off as stale and unmemorable. What's really a shame here is that there was a lot of room to develop JD as a character if the developers had decided to keep focus on him instead of Kate. Okay, so before moving on, I'm gonna have to talk about the Settlement 2 massacre for a second. So if you don't know what that is, let me educate you real quick. The Settlement 2 massacre was an incident that occurred before Gears 4, where JD, Del, and this douchebag named Foz were ordered to monitor a civilian protest. The protesters started getting feisty and began throwing incendiary grenades at our boys and their robo-pals. The incident culminated in JD and Foz opening fire on the protesters. Now, since Foz was the commanding officer, Del thought that it was him who gave the order to open fire, but in Gears 5 we found out that it was actually JD who was the one who gave the order and take the first shot. Upon discovering this, Kate, Del, and Marcus were understandably taken aback that JD would do such a thing and keep it a secret from them. This causes a rift between the characters for the rest of Gears 5. But it just feels so underdeveloped because this twist happens moments before the game shifts all of its focus onto Kate, forcing JD to take a backseat in the plot for the rest of the game. The end result is this half-baked plot element that just doesn't really go anywhere. The other characters kind of just start forgiving JD as the game goes on, but it never really feels earned. This could have been a great opportunity to do a good character arc for JD. We got glimpses into JD and Marcus's tumultuous relationship back in Gears 4, which also never really culminated into anything interesting. I think the game's story would have been far more interesting if JD was still the main character, and if one of the game's central plot points was JD having to mend his relationships with his father and his friends. Taking this a step further, I also think it would have been really impactful if JD sacrificed himself at the end of Gears 5 instead of Jack. Like, I'm not hating on Jack here, Jack's awesome. I'm just saying he is a literal robot. But I think this would have offered JD a chance to get a full redemptive character arc and would have made him a lot more memorable. So I also want to discuss the characters from Gears Tactics for a second. I actually had a whole segment planned for these guys, but the video runtime started to get kind of long and it felt a little out of place anyway, but I did just want to say a couple quick things about these guys, because these guys are hilariously bad characters.
That is one big pile of shit.
I think the quality of these characters can pretty much be summed up with Reyna's voice acting.
They'll outlive your ass. That's for sure.
Also, what the hell is wrong with her facial animations? But I digress. Okay, let's get these characters off the screen and let's talk about some good characters. I think these games' writers need to take a step back and reflect on what made the cast from the original games so much more likable. I think that Cole is the perfect example for this. Now, Cole isn't exactly the poster boy for character depth, but at least he stands out from the rest of the group and has enough charisma to keep the audience's attention.
We're gonna whoop your mama's ass! Wow!
His overly flashy and vulgar persona just match the game's aesthetic perfectly, and the same can be said for Marcus and Baird. On the surface level, Marcus actually has a lot of similarities with Kate. He's a hyper-serious, no-nonsense kind of dude. So what exactly separates these two characters from one another? Well, it helps when your voice sounds like this.
Feel that? That's from Dom. And everyone else you killed, you bitch.
Meanwhile, Kate's over here going like,
My head.
it's a lot easier to convince me of a character's badassery when they have the voice to back it up. Not to mention that Marcus is actually part of some of the funniest moments in these games.
Shouldn't someone with real military authority be here?
It's Foz, right?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Shut the fuck up, Foz.
Dom is probably the tamest of all these characters, but he is easily the character most responsible for any good emotional moments in these games, with his death scene still being the most impactful moment in the series by far. Then we got Baird, and Baird, well, Baird's kind of an asshole. But even though he can be kind of a little bitch sometimes, he's got some wit to him and he starts to grow on you as the games go on. And even if you don't like his personality, well, at least he has one. Basically, what I'm trying to say with this video is that these characters are total butt, so I prefer the admittedly simple yet charismatic original cast. Now, I don't want to end this video on such a somber note because I think the Gears games still have a lot going for them. The gameplay still feels good and the multiplayer is as fun as the classic Gears games always were. They should really bring this execution back though. Just saying. The campaign though is a big draw of these games for me and I'm sure a lot of other people feel the same way. And frankly, I'm just not excited for Gears 6 anymore because I'm not invested in these characters. Unless the developers decide to change their character lineup, I'm afraid interest in these games' stories will continue to wane.